I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then I'm going to sit down and join them. On my far left is Dr. Peg Sandel. Dr. Sandel has over 2 decades of service in the Bay Area Jewish community. She has taught adult education classes at venues around the Bay Area, including right here at Congregation Untitled Chapter. Dr. Sandel has been a lecturer in Jewish studies at San Francisco State University. As a college freshman at a Christian college, Dr. Sandel decided to convert to Judaism and make her career about learning in Jewish community. Dr. Sandel received her PhD degree in Jewish Studies from the University of California, Berkeley Graduate Theological Union, her master's degree in Jewish Studies from the Graduate Theological Union, and her bachelor's degree in Religious Studies from right here at UC California at Santa Barbara. In the middle, I'd like to welcome and introduce Sergeant Brian K. Woodson, also known as Sergeant BK. Sergeant BK began his adulthood as a commissioned officer in the United States Air Force. He left the United States Air Force to answer the call to ministry. After completing seminary, he was ordained at Middle Run Baptist Church in Xenia, Ohio in February of 1990. Referring to his relationship with the Lord, he took the title of servant and is known throughout the Bay Area and beyond as Servant BK. He has served as a senior pastor for 26 years of the past 29 years and is currently the founding pastor of Oakland's own Bay Area Christian Connection. Servant BK Woodson Sr. is a pastor with a strong sense of community activism and a keen interest in social justice. He has hands-on and feet-on-the-street involvement in issues related to bridging relations within the Oakland community and creating a future for our children. He is the president of the Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance, the IMA, and director of the Emerging Leaders Program of the Leadership Institute. Servant BK Woodson is a published author, a musician, a very proud father of 4 fantastic children, and happy to be Valerie's husband. And then right next to me is Dr. Marc Dollinger. Dr. Marc Dollinger is the Richard and Rhoda Goldman Chair in Jewish Studies and Social Responsibility at San Francisco State University. He has served as a research fellow at Princeton University Center for the Study of Religion, as well as the Andrew W. Mellon Postdoctoral Fellow and lecturer in humanities at Bryn Mawr College, where he coordinated the program in Jewish Studies. Professor Marc Dollinger is the author of several books, including one to be published in June on Black Power, Jewish Politics, Reinventing the Alliance in the 1960s. He is a past president of both Jewish Community High School of the Bay and Brandeis Hillel Day School. Marc serves as the academic vice president of Lehrhaus Judaica, as well as a trustee of the United Reform Judaism Camp Newman and the Bay Area Jewish Healing Center. Marc also sits on California Advisory Committee to the United States Commission on Civil Rights. We welcome our guests. So I'm going to invite Marc to come up because he would like to stand. And Marc, in 5 minutes or less, please start us off with some historical context for the discussion. Where does the concept of Zionism come from? Please briefly walk us through an abridged, highly abridged version of the history of Zionism. I'll leave it to you.
American Jews are so confused about Judaism and Zionism. Each time Israeli groups come through the Bay Area, I am honored to get to give them their history of American Jews, history of California Jews, history of San Francisco Jews, history of Zionism, all in an hour. So I'm ready for this. I promised them that in 45 minutes I will turn all of these Israelis into Jewish anti-Zionists. They laugh at me until the 46th minute when they have to admit my success. You see, our confusion grows from the United States Constitution, which, to the detriment of Jewry, instituted separation of church and state. Which brings me, I appreciate that I'm tenured, so I'm going in the other direction. I'm going back to 7th grade religious school. Are you an American Jew or a Jewish American? Did you all get that question right? And there was a correct answer in Sunday school, that's for sure. You see, the U.S. Constitution bifurcates religious identity from national identity. The appropriate answer for an American Jew is, I am Jewish by religion and American by nationality. Very few other places in Jewish history and very few other places on planet Earth with Jewish communities have this bifurcation between national status and religious status. And that, to me, is the foundation of so much of our Constitution today. For most of American Jewish history, American Jews have identified as anti-Zionist. And that characterization is rooted in the U.S. Constitution's separation of church and state, which is to say, if one is a U.S. citizen, one must be an anti-Zionist. San Francisco Jews in the late 19th and early 20th century led the nation. Congregation Chair of Israel, if you have a chance to see the stained glass window of Moses descending from Mount Sinai with the Ten Commandments, except that he's not in Sinai. He's in Yosemite, right? Yeah, because only in San Francisco does California become Eretz Zion, the land of Zion, and San Francisco becomes the New Jerusalem. And as I explained to the Israelis who are obligated to sit in that sanctuary for this talk, when that stained glass window went up in 1905, the time of the Second Aliyah, if there had been somebody from the Jewish Agency telling you all to leave the beautiful city of San Francisco to go to what was then the malaria-infested swamps of Ottoman Palestine, I don't think any of those San Francisco Jews sitting there would have done it. And this was how we understood American Zionism until Louis Brandeis in 1915. Well known here as the first Jewish Supreme Court judge, bringing up the question, how can a United States Supreme Court judge also be the national leader of American Zionism? Well, he came up with a theory. And his theory was that Americanism equaled Zionism. That if you looked at Herzl and Ben-Gurion and the development of the modern Jewish state, it paralleled Jeffersonian democracy. And what the kibbutz movement was trying to do was what Jefferson was trying to do. Farmers, independent, who own their own tools in a democratic environment. With what is called the Brandeisian synthesis. That's an impressive one for my students. Take your last name, put I-A-N at the end, and maybe someday, Dr. Sandel, it will be the Sandelian synthesis that even has an alliterative quality to it as well. Brandeis' redefinition of Zionism to say one can be a patriotic American citizen and a loyal Zionist caused the American Zionist ranks to increase precipitously. 1915 is when he articulated this particular idea, and the big shift in 1915 with Brandeis is American Jews did not need to make Aliyah. And with this, a fundamental split between those Jews who would make Aliyah and those Jews who stay on whether or not each of them could call themselves a Zionist. So here in San Francisco, largely in the classical reform movement, there was this sense that there was absolutely no need until the Shoah, World War II, and the Holocaust. Now the need for a Jewish homeland for humanitarian, if no other reasons, really brought American Jews into the Zionist fold. We now have three, sometimes competing definitions of Zionism. Zionism as a rejection of Americanism, the early definition. Zionism as equal to Americanism, the Brandeisian synthesis. And now a philanthropic approach to Zionism, which is that American Jews need to support a state of Israel for the benefit of the Jews of Eastern Europe who needed it. It took some time for some American Jewish national organizations to get on the Zionist bandwagon even after 48. In a famous exchange between the head of the American Jewish Committee and David Ben-Gurion in Jerusalem, they made a deal. Ben-Gurion agreed that he would not tell American Jews to make Aliyah, and the AJC head would agree to support the idea of a Jewish state, and they're both going to go to Jerusalem, they're both going to make their speeches. Blaustein from the AJC made a speech, Ben-Gurion makes a speech, and he can't control himself. So finally he says, okay, but if you're trained as a physician, we really need you, and if you know much about agriculture, head on over. And ultimately, by the 1950s, there was a new third version of American Zionism, which lasted until the 1967 Six-Day War, which is the subject of one chapter from the new book, where I argue that the rise of black nationalism and the rise of leftist politics in the mid-60s, which purged many white Jews from civil rights organizations, turned them into emulating black nationalism in a Jewish way. So the Jewish youth of Berkeley especially, after the 1967 war, brought in ideological Zionism that American Jewry had never seen before. It also brought a split in the Jewish left, because as the new left went anti-Zionist, and Jews who were leftists after '67 had to make a critical choice. Were they going to remain in the Zionist fold and leave their leftist colleagues, or were they going to embrace anti-Zionism? And here in Berkeley, more than any other place, it really divided the community. So when we talk about Zionism and Judaism and American Jews, we have to make sure we get the time and the place set, so then we can have the definition, and then we can talk about engaging Zionism.
All right. Servant BK, as a Christian pastor, a leader in the African American community, someone who's traveled to Israel numerous times, who has deep experience with historical religious texts, what are the different ways you've heard Zionism described, and how do you describe Zionism?
Thank you for the question. First, I want to thank you all for the opportunity to speak. I keep hearing about the robust dialogue within the Jewish community, and here I am in the midst of it. So I hope it lives up to my expectations. I have a lot of friends in the room, and if you would allow me not to say your names, because I only have 4 minutes. It's important for me to begin with this self-identification. I cannot see my blindness, and I cannot hear your criticism, but I need your help. I cannot see my blindness, by which I understand that the things I see so clearly are the things that blind me most effectively. I also want to identify with the fact that my ancestors in this nation were not considered human beings. That my history and my heritage is informed by the shadows of the systemic, institutional, deliberate dehumanization and commodification of my body. So I cannot really speak about anything as folk who don't have the baggage I have speak, because I don't know that world. It's an interesting question, and I don't presume to speak for any significant section of African American clergy, but I will say that the word Zionism is not really a word that we use. We would talk about, or in the circles in which I run, there is talk about Jews, and there's talk about Israel, and there are opinions about both. Many of those opinions are tragically uninformed. I also want to say, by way of commercial, I had no idea that San Francisco was considered anything like a Jerusalem, and that I want you all to know that I was born and raised in Second Jerusalem, which is Brooklyn, New York. I'm also an evangelical pastor. My church is a part of the Evangelical Covenant Church, and I will say that that we have to be careful that I think Jewishness and Zionism gets fetishized in evangelical circles. And the embrace of Zionism or the embrace of the Jews have this triumphal, ignorant forward notion attached to their imagination and Anglo-Saxon supremacist, mostly white supremacist notions and readings of a text. And the Jews are this entity within it, and they see Judaism and Jews through a lens of white superiority. African Americans, and here's as I get to my 3.5 minute mark, African Americans engage Jewish community and Israel at two moments. It's like Marc said. When we see God as the God of the powerless, and when we imagine Jewish communities, either of history or of the present day, as our fellow sufferers, as those who are oppressed, as those who are the quintessential other, then there is identity and there is connection. When we imagine Israel, modern day Israel, with its power, there's a shift that occurs. And the folk that I know and have met in Ferguson, and the younger radical folk who are in the streets in Ferguson or in the streets in our area, they identify with Palestinians. Because when they were being tear gassed, the Palestinians told them, okay, this is what you need to do, this is how you do it. So the question about Zionism within the theological frames that I'm aware of pivot on the point of power. If you are powerless and the God of the powerless, then there's affinity. If you are powerful, the God of the powerful is not a God that the African American church traditionally finds connection with. If that's
Dr. Sandel, head. In your role of head of school at Brandeis Marin, you serve a population, and in your mission it says your community is connected to Jewish values and in some way inspired by Israel. Give us a sense of the range of perspectives of families in terms of Zionism, and how do you hold your commitment to your mission in the school and also the diversity of perspectives about Zionism?
First, I just want to say thank you for the honor to JCRC, for the honor and privilege of sitting up here and engaging in the conversation with all of you. I'm in the education business, which means I'm in the business of the future and trying to anticipate what kinds of skills and realities and challenges and opportunities our students will face, and then to somehow prepare them for that. While, as a school that is committed to being a values-based community school, tries to also ground students in a sense of identity that has them ask the question, why do you shop at a farmer's market? To link values to decision making. And so we are clear that we support Israel as the Jewish homeland, and we support critical thinking. And I appreciated, Abby, when you said that when you started the evening by saying this is about machloket. We value machloket, and we try to, and we actually think of Jewish education as fundamentally about thinking about ethics, thinking about values, thinking about how to cultivate moments of awe in life, and also standing in a place that, and recognizing that we tend to learn more from people who see things differently than we learn from people who see things the way we do. In an academic context, you could imagine that that would be a pretty obvious thing when you're studying poetry, because everybody reads a poem differently. And that's an interesting exercise, but we do it with math. Tell me how you solved that problem. We do it with Jewish text. And we do it with Israel as well. We culminate our trip, our a student's journey at our school culminates with a trip to Israel. We just came back, actually. I was just there in February with them. And I'll speak more about what that curriculum looks like, because it does seek to cultivate at one and the same time a sense of appreciation for Israel, while also giving students an opportunity to wrestle with the hard questions that are the inheritance of this young generation. And so I agree with you, BK, that we don't really use the word Zionism all that much. You know, it just doesn't come up. We're not political. We're not a political school. We teach civics and civic responsibility, but not from a political perspective. And when we teach Israel from a historical perspective, and from a perspective of that this is quite a human achievement, that a people has risen from literally death to reconstitute itself after 2,000 years, to resurrect a language that had been relegated to study halls and bring it into the public square. And we want our students to graduate with an appreciation of that, as well as with an appreciation of the challenges that governing inevitably brings.
BK, can you tell us a little bit about your ministry, the communities with whom you interact, and if Zionism comes up, or Israel comes up, how does it come up? And how do you frame or sort of engage and hold that conversation with the communities that you're interacting with?
Yeah, so recently, let me say one other thing. So it's fascinating to me, and I think it should be fascinating to us all to engage the fact, from my perspective, it is the case that a people fashioned homelessness into a universally humanizing force. That's what I think of the Jewish people. People who found a way to empower identity through persecution and homelessness. And now what the heck do you do when you have home and it's arguably partially inhabited? It's a big question. Nowadays, another thing I want to say, so 30 years ago, my first trip to Israel was 30 years ago. And then I went like last year, and my God, the change. Oh my God. Right? 34, 35 years, you're just like a lot of rocks, a lot of desert, a lot of dust. And now it's like almost going, across town. But the conversations I have now with activists, when Israel comes up, there's a lot of angry energy. I've heard someone say that Netanyahu is very popular, more popular in the United States than he is in Israel, just like Trump is more popular in Israel than he is in the United States. In our community, Netanyahu is not. He disrespected our president, right? So there's energy. There's energy, and I'm old enough to know that my first impressions of civil rights, of movement for justice, it was African Americans and Jewish communities and Jewish rabbis, right? Fighting together, being killed together, struggling together. This current generation of social activists don't have.
Mark, you work with a diverse population at San Francisco State. You interact with a lot of different communities. In your experience, when Zionism comes up, how does it come up and how do you relate to them around that conversation?
I'd like to thank you for asking when and if Zionism comes up at SF State. Unlike my two colleagues, I can tell you we do engage the question and the word quite a bit. This morning's class was Modern Jewish History. I have 13 students, 12 are students of color. And 2 that I can tell informally are Jewish. So it is our goal in the Jewish Studies department to have a class that reflects the larger undergraduate population. So I'm an academic historian by training, so I will take an historical approach. It layers down into the next step. One, there needs to be a narrative, and that we have a syllabus. They need to learn certain things in terms of the timeline on the history of Zionism, for example. So want to get that in. And just to play on an excellent polysyllabic Abby used earlier, we take a historiographic approach, which means that they need to study and learn and understand the varying ways in which generations of academic historians have viewed Zionism. And as SF State, and as a professor of Jewish studies, I'm trained in Zionism from a Jewish studies perspective, and I am unapologetic, and that's the angle that I bring. And I tell every single class, if you would like to learn Palestinian perspectives, we have the only College of Ethnic Studies in the country, and we have an outstanding faculty who will give you another competing perspective, which is, for me, ultimately the point of the university and especially of SF State. In Jewish studies, I want them to know how Zionism fits into the Jewish narrative, so we work on that. And in Jewish studies, we struggle to show ways in which the Jewish experience informs or challenges experiences for non-Jews. So if I can get to that point, that's sort of the big payoff. And the current work on Zionism that I'm working on is the relationship between Black nationalism and Jewish nationalism and the ways in which those two intersect.
I just want to pause and say, if you have a question, thank you. Please put up your card and we'll pick it up. If you need another card or another pen, put your hand up and we'll take care of you. Hi, thank you. So the population, aside from parents with whom you work, are young people who are something like 5 to 13 years old. What about Zionism is important to teach them? When do you teach it? How do you teach it? You let us know it's not a political environment, but what do you teach and how do you teach it and when?
I realized I didn't totally answer your question before about the composition of the community, so let me just tell you a quick story. I was at a tour, an admissions tour last year, and our admissions director always puts out name tags of the people who are coming on the tour, and I sort of peruse them and sort of get ready to see who's coming. And I look down and I see Mohammed. And I'm like, cool, you know, it's Marin, excellent. And, you know, I'm really proud to say that Mohammed, who is Palestinian Muslim, and his wife Uyanga, who is Buddhist, Mongolian Buddhist, has decided to make the Jewish Day School their home. We're home to Hindus, Christians, the unaffiliated, atheists, Chabad, and every denomination of the Jewish, of Jewish denominationalism, Episcopalians as well. And so it's interesting and fascinating to think about what does it mean to be a Jewish day school in Marin County. And that takes me a little bit back to the curriculum. We call it Israel education. And it's embedded a little bit in Jewish studies, it's embedded a little bit in the teaching of Hebrew language. We teach about Israel all the way through the grades. And at about 4th grade, we begin to introduce complexity. Because actually 4th grade is the year you begin to introduce complexity in every subject. They're no longer looking at whole numbers, they're looking at fractions and decimals and parts of numbers, and all of a sudden numbers don't act the way they used to. And then they need to spend several years just sort of wrapping their minds around that concept. And so I don't know if you've ever noticed, I imagine some of you have noticed, but when we want to bring out a map of Israel, it is very hard to find an educational map of Israel that has the West Bank. And it is very hard then to have a conversation that resembles the one that we hear in the news or see in the newspaper when the maps don't even contemplate that there might be another perspective. And so we've developed an entire unit because also part of the fourth grade curriculum is studying the state of California and California geography. You may remember the studying of the missions and all that. So our students are studying all of that, and as they're thinking about California geography and California state history, we're introducing them to topographical maps and geological maps and political maps and street maps. And it gives us an opportunity to begin to talk about the stories that maps tell. That even a map tells a story. And we begin to introduce nuance and complexity into the students' engagement with Israel. Fast forward 4 years, just to give you a second example from the curriculum. I already mentioned that we take our students to Israel. We want to make it an educational trip and not just a tourist trip. So what is the difference between a tourist trip and an educational trip? We've created a curriculum. I have to say our art teacher, Lisa Levy, is really brilliant, and I give her a shout out. I speak b'shem Omra. She's created a curriculum around Israeli art and culture that focuses on graffiti and street art. And this is brilliant because the kids, 8th graders, are drawn to graffiti and street art. It's hip, it's cool, it's amazing, and it happens to be everywhere in Israel. And so the kids become literally expert in different Israeli street art artists and graffiti artists. Who are they? What brings them to their art? Why do they do what they do? What's the message? What are the issues? And they're drawn in. It's cool. It's interesting. As I said before, it begins to really solidify that sense of appreciation, appreciating Israel. But the interesting thing is, and each student becomes an expert in one of those artists, and they teach each other. So they're expert in one and familiar with many. When we get to Israel, their eyes are open. We've taken their cell phones away, which means they're present. And they are looking because they start to see the graffiti all over the place. Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Haifa, the north, the south, everywhere they go, it's there. And they look, there's Inspire. He's an artist who draws flowers and wants to spark a sense of inspiration everywhere. Look, there's Solomon. You may recognize Solomon from the shutters in the Machane Yehuda market in Jerusalem. He depicts historical and everyday faces. And on and on and on, the kids are walking around Israel with their eyes wide open, extemporaneously and spontaneously teaching. But here's the magic. Look, there's a piece on the wall that deals with Arabs and Jews. Am Israel Chai. Am Israel Chai Baseret. The people of Israel are alive, or living. The people of Israel live in a movie. It's a Hebrew expression that says they're like dreamers. They're not living in reality. What does that mean? Let's talk about that. Another graffiti artist depicts ghosts on the walls to suggest that there are people who purchase apartments in Israel from France and the UK, the United States and Canada and abroad, and they live in those apartments for just a few weeks a year, driving up the cost of real estate and making housing scarce for people who live there. And on. Depictions of two men kissing, and those men are clearly Orthodox Jews with payas. And issue after issue, religious, political, social, economic, comes to the fore, and our students engage because the graffiti and the street art has drawn them in and given us an opportunity to engage. And I will tell you that I will stand behind, just like VK has planted his flag and Marc has planted his flag. I want our students to be prepared for the world that they will grow up in. And if I am committed, I have heard too many times, and I know I'm talking over the while, I'll stop. I've heard too many times graduates of Jewish day schools come back after being in college and say, hey, like, why didn't you tell me all this stuff is going on out there? And I don't ever want a student to come back to me as an educator or to my school and say, why didn't you tell me that there were deeper, issues? I love the innovation. I love my iPhone. I love Siri. I love Waze. I love making the desert flower. I love all the innovations and the startup and the innovative thinking that comes out of Israel, but why didn't we ever talk about some of the challenges facing Israel? And so our school is committed to cultivating appreciation and critical thinking in a diverse population where, my apologies to any Marinites who might be here, but it's the Jewish day school sometimes that is the most diverse school in Marin County.
Let's talk a little bit about Bay Area demographics and perspectives on Zionism, and then we're going to get into some of your questions. The Jewish Community Federation recently published a demographics new community study, and the findings tell us that the Bay Area Jewish community is and is becoming more racially and ethnically diverse. It's rather queer, it's highly engaged, yet less traditionally affiliated. A large segment of our community are young adults around or under 40. And there are large numbers of Jewish community members who are less attached to Israel than the generations prior. Marc, start us off with 2 minutes about what the shifting trends say about where we are as Jews and Zionism and where we might be going.
All right, so first I say I'm gifted and blessed that I had Ilana Kaufman as my teacher, so we get to go out and I get to ask you that question and you give me the answer, so thank you. Second, I'm an historian. It's tough enough to predict the past, it's hard to predict the future in terms of this. Though my career thesis argues that in terms of Jews and politics, Jews tend to follow the politics of the dominant culture. Sometimes it's refracted in a Jewish way, but in most cases, Jews are following rather than leading. So in terms of Zionism and Israel and where so I deal with most of the 20-something crowd at SF State, they're looking around at their larger peer group and they're tending to be informed by those attitudes. I don't believe in what's called straight-line sociological theory. That is, if current rates of whatever continue, this will be the date at which there won't be any more whatevers. We have a sociologist here, but I appreciate the affirmation. Instead, it's incredibly dynamic. And it also brings up issues of intersectional identities as well, because so many of my students are coming from multiple places in terms of how they self-identify, each of which refracting against Israel and Zionism in different ways, and they are in struggle to figure out, even where they are individually, much less sort of in a larger sense.
And BK, in your work in social justice spaces and listening to the demographic shifts in the Bay Area around Jews becoming more diverse and being less connected to Israel, how does that inform your thinking about the social justice movement and relationships with Israel?
Well, so I'm a little less optimistic. I think I'm not a historian, so it's easy for me to predict the future. I believe that we have left the age of reason. I believe that what is true is no longer relevant. I believe that we are now in an age of image. I heard that before the age of reason, I heard one scholar call it the age of magic. If before reason there was magic, after reason, I don't know what it will be. But it will be less attached to what we know as reality. And I think our demographic and our ability to be intersectional and affirming and welcoming and diverse, and our ability to be okay with diversity and the process that demands we speak more, that demands we make decisions less quickly and less decisively, I think that makes us vulnerable to the trend, the alternate trend of demagogues and fascists and folk who run around with guns. So I'm very afraid of powerful images, powerful forces, imposing on our conversation their own paradigm. And I think we're very vulnerable to that.
And Peg, when you hear about the shifting demographics, when you think about engaging your students in the critical thinking, the values, the things that sort of drive your relationship to Israel at the school, how might this change how you teach or how you frame what's being taught in the next 3, 5, 7 years?
So I'm both a historian and a futurist. The training is in history of ideas, but my profession is in the future. So as I look back at the Jewish conversation about Israel or Israel and the Palestinians, I see a dialogue, or I see a conversation that was centered on sort of us versus them. And I think in a lot of ways, many of us got sort of stuck there. And now we've got this sort of new dynamic where it might be us versus them. I'm not quite sure. And we don't know how to engage necessarily. Go back to the idea of Mathloket. We don't know how to engage with a diversity of ideas around Israel. And we've got young people growing up in the Bay Area for whom sometimes Israel becomes a bit of a crucible, right? That their liberal values sort of come into sort of conflict with what they see coming at them in the media, that Israel is somehow operating as against those liberal or in opposition to those liberal values. And we're trying to make the conversation slightly more nuanced. I feel like as an American, I can love America. I feel lucky that I grow up in a place as a woman, as a person who used to be Christian and now is Jewish, as a person who is gay, that I have a job, that I have a great life. I enjoy my liberty and my freedom, and I feel blessed. And I also sometimes am so angry at this country, and I feel that it is so broken, and it makes me sad. And I wonder, why is America so broken and problematic and lame? And I can hold those two things. Why can't we do that with regard to Israel? Why can't we see that Israel is amazing and incredible and has brought Nobel, Prize winners and incredible innovation, and like I said, rising like a phoenix from the ashes to provide a model for oppressed peoples and people who have been the victim of oppression to find their way. And also to say, but man, there are problems, there are issues, we gotta deal with it. This is hard. And rather than making it a zero-sum game where it's about this versus that, again, to cultivate a sense of appreciation for what is positive, and a sense of critical thinking and problem solving and direct engagement for what is hard.
So we're going to start to get into some of your questions, and I'm going to try to group them a little bit for the sake of trying to get through as many as possible. And I want to let's jump in and start off talking about things like equal rights and democracy and the Jewish state. Marc, will you start us off with just your academic view on sort of how we can understand the themes of equal rights and justice and democracy as it relates to a Jewish state and a Zionist state? In 2 minutes or less.
Wow. Modern democracies that grow from heterogeneous populations are challenged by difference. The United States is an example of that. It's more difficult in the state of Israel because there's overlapping definitions of difference against the notion of a Jewish national home. So amongst citizens of the State of Israel who are Jewish, there is difference. National origin difference, racial difference, religious differences, political differences. And that's enough for any modern liberal democracy to have to engage. State of Israel has citizens who are Arab, now often self-defined as Palestinian, who carry Israeli passports and are entitled to equal rights as citizens of the State of Israel. That's a second layer of complexity, which makes it even more difficult. And I think the poignant notion there is Hatikva, the national anthem, the hope, which tells the story of the Jewish hope for the return. And for every fifth Israeli citizen for whom that narrative does not work, how does one play the national anthem of the State of Israel? On top of that would be Palestinians in occupied territories, and even in Gaza who are seeking national self-determination on the same piece of real estate, which goes to Abby's notions of guardians and prophets, because that's going to bring the guardian out in the democratic system. So I think the State of Israel as a democracy has among the most complex challenges any democracy can face as it weighs between a prophetic impulse and an impulse to self-preservation, which every country needs to do as well.
I want to respond just a little bit. And I think that the crisis of humanity, the question of whether or not we as a species are smart enough not to kill ourselves, right, is the question that we're engaging. I don't share Peg's view of America. I cannot. America is founded on three principles: the near genocide and deportation of the indigenous population, the creation of private property, and the exploitation and commodification of human beings. So the myth of America being this wonderful place has never frickin' included me. And it is not going to. I mean, I have hope. I have these gray hair. I saw John Kennedy. I've gone from John Kennedy to Donald Trump. That is tragic. That's tragic. My children, our youngest son, went to a school very much like that. Very inclusive, very diverse. He grew up and embraces diversity. He loves everyone, accepts I thought I was pretty cool. He put me in check several times. And as much hope as I had in his class and his generation, and I see Charlottesville, and I see demagoguery, and I see fascism, and I see, how does it make sense? I'm giving up this microphone. How does it make sense that the answer to the fact that the only nation in the world where children are killed in their schools, that we find the answer is to put more guns in the school? So we are at a crisis as a species. And I think the story, and I hope I'm not fetishizing your culture, and I don't want to do that, but the story of a people that remained a people, even though over centuries and centuries, over millennia, every force tried to destroy them, is the hope for humanity. Because embedded in that story is I don't know, the love, the narrative, the matzah, I don't know what it is. Chicken cookie, I got it. But you understand what I'm saying? So there's a big problem, and you have to figure out, the Ashkenazi versus the Sephardic versus the Mizrahi. You got to get that figured out.
Okay, I want to do a point of process, and then Peg, I'm coming to you.
All right.
A couple of things. We're going to go for another 10 minutes with questions and answers. And then after that, we are going to ask you to give us your best around helping us define Zionism. And so we're going to ask you to work. There are these three giant pieces of paper on the wall. We're going to ask you to give us your definition of Zionism. We're going to ask you what influences your relationship with Zionism. And we're going to ask you what topics or issues related to Zionism need more attention. And so we're going to really encourage you to give us all of your best thinking and strongest opinions about that. And that's going to happen in 10 minutes. The other thing I want to say is that there are a number of questions that have come up that are specifically critical of the JCRC, our policies and our practices. I want to acknowledge those questions are here in my lap. They've come in. They're not going to be part of this discussion, but I have them. I want to let you know that I've read them and we're going to take them back. So I don't want you to think that they've gone nowhere. So I wanted to say that. Peg, given what both Mark and BK have said, for those who are sort of trying to really hold their Zionist identity and their justice identity, their social justice identity, how do you think about that given the important work that you do where you're trying to give young people a balance of both or a sense of their own compass pointing towards both of those things?
It's a great question. At our school, we focus, I sort of said this earlier, we focus on values and trying to cultivate a sense of ethical thinking and awareness. That on some level, the decisions that we make as human beings stem from a value. Like I said, we might shop at the farmer's market, maybe because we value the vibe, maybe because we value supporting local farmers, maybe because we support organic. But whatever those decisions are, we want to try to cultivate a sense of awareness in young people that decisions can reflect values. And so we try to focus on especially our Jewish studies curriculum. We have really the Jewish tradition is enormous. And we can't teach even remotely close to everything. So when we try to make a decision about what do we teach and what do we leave out, we really only have one lens that we look at. It's got to be meaningful, compelling, and relevant to today. It can link people back to history. It can inform future. It can, if it's not meaningful, compelling, and relevant, we're going to leave it to somebody else to teach because we want our students to graduate interested in wanting more. And so we try to focus on a sense of values. And just like I don't care what students believe. I don't care whether they believe in God. I don't frankly care exactly how they choose to practice their religion. I don't have a vested interest in what their ultimate political party selection will be. I want them to get in touch with values of social justice, social responsibility, personal responsibility, a sense of responsibility for our environment and our world, to be able to ask deep and powerful questions so that they can find the problem, because problem solving begins with problem finding. And I want them to be able to look at their world and instead of growing, like so many of us are, increasingly cynical and increasingly pessimistic, I want them to find opportunity where there are problems I want them to use a deep reservoir drawn from a prophetic tradition that says, speak up and speak out when you see something that is wrong. And I want them to draw from a wisdom tradition that they know well so that they can make values-based decisions as they go on with their lives.
What about the Palestinians?
Same, absolutely. We do joint trips with Palestinians. We encounter Palestinians on our trip
What
here.
about the occupation?
Well, look, we talk about and teach about the occupation, absolutely. We don't hide anything from them, including the history. They study American history. We're trying to teach a balanced approach that Israel has a rich and long and complex history and can't and shouldn't be boiled down to any one particular thing. But that through getting in touch with, and when these students arrive at high school, remember they leave us and they're 14 years old, and they're gone. And they're gone. And when they get to their high schools like to accept our students into them because our students are grounded, they have a sense of values, they're good kids, they're just menschy, nice kids who care about being kind to one another, and they're academically well prepared and they engage at a deep level without just, to resorting to shallow analysis, but to think in nuanced ways as a 14-year-old.
Okay. And this question, there's a couple of different cards with a similar question, and I think it's really interesting. Any one of you, talk a little bit about other aspects of Zionism beyond attachment to land. There's religious Zionism. There are different perspectives on Zionism. What are the other expressions of Zionism that you think about this outside of attachment to land?
Yeah, so on the campus of SF State, there's a particular line on what Zionism is, which is related to occupation, and it's a political line. When I teach Zionism, and I only do it in a survey course, so the most I can give it is a class or two, it's really an overview of the 5 or 6 major streams of Zionism. And what I'm trying to explain to the students is that some Zionism is ultra-nationalist, and that's what's happening today in the modern state of Israel. A lot of it is cultural, some of it is secular labor socialist, and there are also Zionists who did not believe in a nation state, and those who believed in a binational state. And that there was great debate among Zionist leaders, and even as the state was created, and even as it has developed over the last 60 or 70 years. My motto for my students is to complicate their narrative and deepen learning. So I'm trying to react to what I think that they are generally getting in order to have the university classroom be a place where no matter what they're getting, they're going to be challenged.
What about Zionism without an attachment or a preoccupation with the West, right? So I'm trying to find a different word, 2 different words for white supremacy. But what about Zionism without white supremacy? What would that look like? People are at move. People are on the move all over the planet. Because the planet, we haven't taken care of the planet, and the planet is going to stop taking care of us. And so people are on the move. And so how do we decide? I think your text should say something about this. How do we welcome the stranger? We who were strangers now have our home. How do we welcome those who are coming and are strangers? If you don't get that right, I don't think you deserve to be on the planet.
Okay, do you want to take the last one?
Wait a minute.
I'm gonna let Sir BK end with whichever sentence he chooses to end with. I'm gonna ask Ted to go ahead and finish this question, and then we're gonna move into the next phase.
There are a lot of ways to think about the factors that led up to the establishment of the State of Israel. Some people think about it in religious terms, some people think about it in historical terms. For us, and this is true also at the school that I used to teach at the Jewish Community High School, when we were thinking about how do we teach the history of the establishment of the State of Israel, we sort of took an academic approach to say, you know, that in the 19th century, in the 1800s, there were many, the rise of the nation state was the preoccupation of many peoples in the West. And yes, you know, the founders of the state of Israel were steeped in that tradition, and too were caught up in a sense of nationalism. And a sense of establishing a nation state as a result or as an answer to the Jewish problem that left Jews in ghettos, persecuted, and as oppressed people in their lands. And so we don't take at our school a religious narrative, and we don't take at our school strictly a narrative of the establishment of the state of Israel is solely and exclusively the result of the Holocaust, although we're mindful of those narratives and we have a sense of them and an awareness of them. But for us, we take a historical approach to Zionism.
Do you also teach about the Nakba?
Yes, we do.
Okay. So at this point, this is your time to put your opinions in an unfiltered way on all of on these three topics on the walls.